Okay, so for this question, question 2, many of you chose this one. As I explained in the response to question 1, the questions are broken up into always 4, 7, and 9. So your 4-mark question is similar to a short answer question. Your 7-mark one is not that hard. You need to make 7 marking points, okay? But your 9-mark one is marked on a rubric, and I will explain the rubric in my response to question 4, because most of you answered question 4, and so I want you all to have an example of seeing that rubric. For now, let's just go through this, and I will give you some exam strategies. I'm not going to give, like, the whole mark scheme here. You can read the mark scheme. But I'm just going to give some strategies for what you should be looking for when you first look at your exam questions. So A, the command term is distinguish. So what is the difference between them, between a charismatic flagship species and a keystone species, using named examples, okay? This is important. You will not get the marks if you do not name the examples. Some of you did a great job with this, right? And I really liked on some people's answers where they talked about overlapping, where it was the flagship species and it was the keystone species as well, or there was a keystone species, but they chose another one to be, I think it was in Marco's answers about fish and the sardines, and there was sort of a charismatic species in that they used as the flagship species, but the keystone species was really the sardines. I would say here the only thing to remember is that a keystone species, it's not at the base of the food chain, right? The analogy for the keystone is from an arch, and the analogy holds for the definition as well, because the keystone is this stone in here. So all these bits of the arch are leading this way, and all the bits of this arch are leading this way, and the keystone is stopping the arch from falling over. So if you remove the keystone species, the ecosystem collapses. It's not the same as being at the base of the food chain. It's more like being at the center of the food chain, where so many different things are depending on you, that if you were to pull, this species out, all these other species would collapse and the whole food chain would fall apart. So it's not just that it's at the bottom of the food chain as the producer. Okay. As I said as well here for the named examples, I have a document that has all the case studies that you need to know, all the bits and pieces you should know that you have to memorize, and I will provide that for you. All right. How can conservation strategies increase the resilience of protected areas? The key thing here was knowing the definition of resilience. Okay. So resilience. Most of you got that it has to do with biodiversity. And so thinking about how can conservation strategies increase biodiversity. Another one is size of the area. Bigger the area is, the more increased resilience. Well, if I have a little tiny area, what can I do to increase their size? I can link them up with corridors. And so that will increase the resilience of the area. One that almost nobody mentioned are storages. This is why rainforests are not resilient, because in a rainforest, all of the storage, all of the carbon and the nutrients, they're all in the trees, and there's not much stored in the soil. As soon as there's any nutrients, the rainforest is so productive and every niche is filled that they will get taken up. And so when you deforest, the rainforest, and you remove all of this and take it elsewhere, you're left with this incredibly porous soil that doesn't have any nutrients or anything left in it. And that's why rainforests are not resilient. So size of storages, size of the area, biodiversity, very, very important for resilience. So if you imagine then now developing the conservation strategies for these three aspects, you can then get to 7 marks, okay? Finally, with reference to named examples, discuss the challenges facing human societies in managing the sustainability of tropical biomes. And as I said in question 1, you have these 3 sections to the rubric. So this is not marked by adding up points. It's marked by looking for certain attributes of the question and seeing the best fit from the rubric. And so with the top scoring rubric, basically you're using ESS terminology. So something like sustainable development, pollution, systems, models, feedback. You are using a lot of examples, like pertinent examples, appropriate examples, case studies. You are giving an in-depth analysis, a solid judgment, so you're closing up your discussion with a solid judgment. And as I said in question 1, I will go through this in more detail for question 4 because almost everybody did question 4. So the details are in there. If you didn't do question 4, please go over to there to see an example of the rubric. So some of them, I mean, you got some of these things, the challenges, you know, like poverty. Most of the communities in tropical regions are developing countries, LEDCs. So that's a challenge, you know, like how do you face, you know, telling people not to hunt or not to use the forest for their resources. But it is tropical. And so, you know, these regions are very highly diverse. And also, you know, you get these old growth, the resources in them are valuable. Some of you talked about, you know, the fact that, you know, Western societies, you know, want the resources from this area. Think about something like Nestle water. And so remove those resources and the local communities don't benefit. So anyway, you'll see from the mark scheme there's many, but you know, you're looking for as named examples. And so this is like looking at different biomes, and some of you did a great job. It's really interesting to me marking your papers when I can read about your own case studies, your bits and pieces that you've picked up from your homes, from places that you've visited, or from things that you've learnt from each other.